We begin all of our new series in a very negative way. Just kidding. But you'll figure out why soon. Welcome to Advent. Advent is the beginning of a whole new church year, like the Jewish holiday for New Year, right? That we get to start not necessarily on the calendar's New Year, but on the church calendar's New Year, and that starts Advent. Advent is 4 weeks long, and a lot of times it's symbolized through blue or purple. I like blue, so I'm wearing blue today. And I have a beautiful blue stole that I got to wear earlier, so I love that. Advent is a fabulous time of year because it makes us slow down and stop and wait. Even when we're our most hurried, when we have all of our parties to go to and all the shopping to get done and all the football to watch and all the cooking to do and go Ohio State, yay. Those kinds of things all happening during the Christmas season, right? But Advent is prior to Christmas. It happens beforehand. So there is this waiting, there is this preparing. But what are we preparing for again? What did Rebecca just tell us? What are we waiting for? Santa! No, wait. Christmas, right? We're waiting for Christmas. Don't we do this every year? Is this news to us? When's Christmas? December 25th, right? We even set a date, so it's the same every year, right? Why is this a surprise to us? Why is there so much anticipation and excitement around Christmas when it happens every year the same way? Well, that's just it, right? It doesn't always happen the same way. Christmas is about God entering the world. God enters the world every day. God is with us in new ways every day. That doesn't mean that the day is not important or doesn't hold some kind of suspenseful anticipation, right? We have no idea how things are going to unfold. And that's the fun of it. That's the surprise on Christmas morning. Not that Jesus is born or that God is with us. We know that already. What's surprising is waiting to see how it unfolds. What is God going to do in our lives this day? And so preparing and waiting and watching is that part of clearing away all the things that get in the way of that joy and that hope and that promise and that anticipation for something new that's about to happen. God is always making things new. Advent is no exception. It's just heightened anticipation. It's intentional space for us to wait and to watch and to listen. We are starting a brand new series today to celebrate the newness of the church calendar year, the newness of a season, the newness of anticipation and waiting and intentional watching and listening. It's called I Am. Ta-da! In Greek, it is ego eimi. And it literally are those statements that are found in the Gospel of John that help identify who Jesus is in the world. That person, that Messiah that we are waiting for. The newness that's coming into the world and transforming our lives. What do we know about it? What can we think about it? What do we think it will do to transform us? Is there any way to identify what it is that's coming and how it might affect us? Well, certainly. God's always given us clues, right? Just look around. These I am statements in the Gospel of John are exactly those. They're clues into who God is, how God works in our lives, and what God entering our life through the Christ is all about. And they're found in the gospel that was the one that was written last. Out of all four of the gospels in our biblical canon, John was the latest of all of them. And it is significantly different in its format and its form. It was written in 70 A.D., 70 years after the ministry of Jesus, right? So you have 70 years of lived experience of Christ in the world before any of it was started to be written down. And the difference between the Gospel of John and the other three Gospels is the format and the style of its writing. Its literature structure, literally, is different than the other three. The other three are very concerned with historical accuracy and storytelling, chronological storytelling. They start with the birth of Jesus, and then they go all the way through Jesus' life and ministry and go into the death of Jesus. John doesn't do that. John tells stories throughout that are bits and pieces about who Jesus is and clues about how he lives his life and reveals God to everybody in the world. But it's in no chronological order. It's in statements like, I am. That gives you an idea of what God is doing in the world, rather than how God lived and died and did ministry in between. It's all about Jesus comparing himself to all these wonderful concepts and images that the people that he's speaking with understand. They understand the power behind the images. For Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's this whole idea that Jesus' being the Messiah is kept a secret in some ways. In Mark, it's called the Messianic Secret. And they don't even talk about who Jesus is. In fact, if the disciples discover who Jesus is along the way, they're admonished immediately, right? And told, please don't tell anyone. But that's the exact opposite of what happens in John. These are the first 5 verses in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Boom. Drop the mic and walk away. You don't need anything more, right? John puts it out there right in front of your face, the entire message of who God is and how God works in the world. Who is the Messiah? The one who is with God at the very beginning. What authority does he have to minister to people and to tell them about God? He is God. He gets to tell everybody about it, what God was like even before the world began, and how all life comes into being through God. He is the light of the world. That continues over and over again throughout the Gospel of John in many and various ways. He is not about to keep this secret. And it's a fabulous story. For many people, if it's not historically accurate, it's not true. And for John, this type of literature of conversational storytelling is fabulously true because it is imbued with meaning. It's not about what happened, it's about what it means that it happens. Why does it matter? Because it tells you who God is and how God works in the world, which then tells you something about who you are and how you can work in the world. There's meaning, there's purpose, there's life, there's light, there's water, there's vines and branches. There's all kinds of beautiful imagery in there that call us into being the most full human beings that we are created to be. That's where the truth and the meaning lies in the Gospel of John. Not in its historical accuracy, but in conversational storytelling. And we're going to cover all those images throughout the next 5 different services, worship services that we have. They're not all weeks. It includes Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. But what we're doing is exploring 5 to 6 of the different I am statements of the total there are 8 in the Gospel of John. And we're going to explore these because as we start to discover who Jesus describes himself as being in the world, we also get clues into who we are. And together, creation and Jesus speak to the truth in each other and help us emerge out into our most fullest identities in the world. In fact, we can be who God sees us to be in the world. Now, these conversations begin with one or two people each, all kinds of engagement with one another. And as you enter into conversation with one another, the storytelling kind of format that the gospel writer uses in the Gospel of John means that as you're speaking, your identity actually emerges out of the conversation for both people that are engaged in the conversation. It's a very powerful format for telling a story. And Jesus' I am statements come out of that. He is revealing who God is and who himself is in the midst of these conversations. The very first one that we will begin with is not Jesus engaged in conversation. It is John the Baptist who precedes Jesus in this storytelling. John the Baptist is sitting and talking with some priests, and he doesn't start with I am. He starts with I am not. Let's listen.
This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. Make straight the way of the Lord, as the prophet Isaiah said."
John the Baptist tells the priests straight out, I am not the Messiah that you are waiting for. He could have led them astray, kept them wondering, could have gotten them to follow along just long enough to be able to listen and hear what might be coming. But he doesn't. He starts by saying, I am not the Messiah and who you are waiting for. And so they say, well, who then are you? And he realizes that in the confession of I am not, he has cleared away a space for who he is to actually emerge. And who he is called by God to make a pathway for the Christ. He is the one that makes straight the pathways for Christ in our lives. That's his identity. That is the call that he has been given by God to be in the world. And by clearing away whatever ego he might have had that led him to some kind of lofty ideas about who he was or who he could become, he is able to actually find space for a possibility of God to enter in and help him figure out who he actually is and what he's supposed to be doing in the world. And that's just how it goes most of the time for us, right? We have to clear away space in order to even be able to listen for God, much less find what God might be calling us to be about. Hearing the Word of God in us helps us engage who we actually are and what we could be doing in the world. John does this. He clears space and provides that straight pathway that leads to Christ. By finding his identity in the midst of letting go of his ego, he actually points toward Jesus. His identity helps provide the space for Jesus' identity to emerge. That's the conversation. Who we are is dependent on who surrounds us. All of creation, human and non. What is that conversation we have with one another that helps us clear away who we're not, so we have a better idea of who we are? Jesus is looking for his identity in a lot of the same way, in conversations. And these labels that we put on ourselves are one thing to clear away. Things like, I am not my father. I am not my mother. I am not my brother or my sister. I am not the person that you say that I am. I am open to be who God sees in me. We call these the I am not statements. And we hear a lot of them lately, right? Black Lives Matter. There's a sign on a school thing that was supposed to be with a black background so you could see it really easily, but let me read it for you. Dear black students in this classroom, your life matters. So we have a whole race of people across this country who have been hearing that their lives are insignificant, and they have to stand up and say, my life matters. I am not insignificant. We have a lot of people dealing with mental illness on all different levels, and they are standing up saying, I am not crazy. My mother had me tested. That's what the guy in Big Bang Theory says. It's kind of a famous line. Sexuality issues across the country, right? They're having to say, I am who I am, however God made me. Homosexuality, transgenders, is not a sin. I am human, created by God in God's image. And all the Muslim friends who have to stand up and say, I am Muslim. I am not a terrorist. We have to clear away those labels that we put on each other and that we put on ourselves in order to make way for that possibility of God to enter into our lives yet again and help us figure out who we are. Sometimes it's through the negative that we get there. But by doing that, in search of our identities, calling out to the Christ in each one of us, we connect with the Christ in Jesus. We point to that Christ that brings love and promise and hope year after year, day after day into our lives. That word of transformation. It's a powerful word. I am says a lot with small letters. We have this very powerful reading that's about to happen, written by Donna Knudsen, and has a whole background of beautiful images that were taken by Donna's daughter Hannah through her photography. She's incredibly gifted that way. And we have Diana Gomez, who's an incredibly dramatic reader, who's going to share it with us today. Close your eyes and listen to the I am that encourages and empowers each of us to find our own identities.
I am the one speaking to you. I am the one who pierces the skin of the universe. I alone can awaken you. Pinpricks and gaps in the clouds, tiny whispers felt near the ribs, covering the heart. Generations of seekers standing alone at the well. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I, who whispers and calls you by name. I, who distorts nothing. In him was life, and the life was the light of all people. I am the one speaking to you. Shadows on the backs of trees, roots drawn down to stream, living in water, wading with bare feet, skin on sharp rock, cleansing the years. I am that which prays within you when you grow tired, when you forget, when it is dark at night and you can't sleep. I am that which trusts your inner vision, your gut, The way synchronicity lines up thoughts and words, lines up sparrows on wires in the winter, lines up neighbors for food at the pantry, back to back, face to face, bone and flesh, drinking in their eyes, and the sound. What is that sound? I am the one speaking to you, learning from my search. I am what everyone can hear and what no one can say. I am mute and my words are endless. I am that which dreams through you into the night, returning up through the sunrise and out the blinds of a window. That which is miracle and mayhem, that which is grace and mercy. That which flows from the thirst of the word to the mouth of a stream, and the bass on the end of a fishing pole. Vibrations in the water, ripples on the pond. I am that which remembers in you to whom you belong. Loud cymbals and crashing gongs, candles lit in the dark, and I light and hearers. Come towards me, you know me. Call upon all the thirsty and all of the blameless. Throw away no one, turn away no one. I am the first and the last, she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the one speaking the truth, and I walk in and I walk out. Pay attention to me, for I am the divine trick playing on all your expectations. The fool who came, the wind among the purifiers, the layers deep down covering soul. A soft breeze from the mountains, the fall autumn leaves piling up down in the valley. I am stillness and sound, the flat keys on the piano and sharp chords on the guitar, beating drums with a harmony, hearing worship in song, finding measures, ticking clocks, eternity, here and now, hope and beauty. I am the one speaking to you.
From the Gospel of John. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is Spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you."
This woman at the well is a Samaritan. And Jesus just happens to be there when she comes up at noon to fetch water. And it is to her that he first reveals who he is as the Messiah. I am he, the one who is speaking to you. He risks everything by revealing himself to this woman. And yet, here they are, in conversation with one another, emerging identities from each other about who they are and who they are becoming. This woman is a mess. The fact that she's there at noon tells you something. Most women who go to fetch water from the well go in the morning when it's not so hot, right? And they go in a big group. They don't go all by themselves in the middle of the day. This woman is different. She's an outcast, even among her own people, even among the other women of the village. She is a woman. She's a Samaritan woman, right? The Jews didn't recognize the Samaritans because they worshipped on a different mountain. The same God, a different mountain. And not only that, she wasn't even recognized in her own community as being a decent human being. She had 5 husbands already. She was working on her 6th. You just didn't do that then. Or now. She's all by herself. She's tried everything on her own and has yet to find an identity that suits her. She's yearning and thirsting for an identity that helps figure out who she really is. What she's tried on so far does not work. And here's Jesus. There are laws against him speaking to her. Lots of them. So not only is he risking his own reputation by having a conversation with this woman, he's risking hers. He's risking the fact that she could be stoned to death for being in that conversation. But they're there, speaking truths to one another. Truths in a way that connect to the core of who they are. The Christ in him speaks to the Christ in her. And identities flourish and emerge. It's an astounding, transformative thing to be in conversation where your identity is named in a way that brings you to life. This woman is so excited she leaves her water behind. She runs back to the city. She tells everybody about this experience and this conversation she's had with this guy. She herself exposes herself to being stoned for having the conversation. But she can't help herself. Some people actually believe her and they come back and they listen to Jesus, and Jesus has a chance to tell his story all over again. The confidence in that identity of who he is getting stronger and stronger with each story. She has opened a pathway for the Christ in our lives, in her life, in their life. She, like John the Baptist, has made straight the pathways for Christ, for the coming of God into the world, transforming our lives in love and grace, promise and hope. All of us have that possibility. She is the very first one to whom he reveals who he is by saying, I am he who is speaking to you. The one you always believed in. The one you knew was coming. Even when you didn't know who you were, you believed in God and God's promise for you. That's the person he was speaking to. And that's where the connection happened. We all have that yearning inside of us. We all have the possibility that in finding our identities, we provide a pathway that leads to Christ. Our identities help identify God in the world, and God's love defines our identity. We are in conversation with one another, continually unfolding the world. All of creation, human and non-human, are involved in this conversation with God, ongoing, unique to each one of us. We all point to Christ in our identities. So how are we going to use these conversations? Are we building bridges and setting tables for these conversations? Or are we building walls? Are we clearing away all the I am nots so that the I am has a chance to speak? Are we called to help others find their identities in the midst of all the clutter in the world? How are we moving as a community of faith to help clear away space for God to be heard in the world? These are the questions that the Gospel of John challenges us with. And these are the questions I'm asking us to sit with for these next 40 days of discernment. Who are we? Who do we say that we are? And who are we becoming in these conversations with one another and with God as we wait and as we listen? This table represents the largest conversation somewhere here. This is an ongoing conversation of God that we have been having year after year, Sunday after Sunday, day after day in our lives. God entering our lives in a transformative way that clears a path for our identities to emerge most fully. Jesus identifies himself over and over again as the one who is with us in the good and the bad. For in the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it and he gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in the remembrance of me." And again, after supper, he took the cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to all to drink, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, who I am in the world, so that you too may be who you are in the world." God shares God's self with all of us in continual conversation and gifts that we then share with one another. In discerning, in questioning, in clearing away, in making straight those pathways for Christ in our lives. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. You do not have to be a member. You don't have to carry that label to participate in this conversation. You don't even have to believe in any particular doctrine or dogma to take part. We only ask that that yearning that is welling up inside of you for what is that core being of who you are comes forward and opens yourself to the conversation with God. If you do choose to come forward, we ask that you take a piece of bread from the loaf and dip it in the juice. And as you take it into yourself, consider who it is that's speaking to you and who it is they are calling you to be. If you choose to take communion from where you're sitting, you're most welcome to do that as well, or to not take communion at all. Just raise your hand and the servers will come to you. You are loved by God as God's children. That is the label that you carry. And that's what will propel us forward in hope and joy in our Advent waiting. As our servers come forward, let us remind ourselves who we say that we are as we take this conversation into the 40 days of discovery. We are an open and affirming family of faith, welcoming all to God's table of love and acceptance. We are diverse, yet united by Christ's example. We care for one another, support one another, and challenge one another to become all that God creates us to be. We work together to nurture our community and to promote peace and justice in our conflicted world. Amen. Please come.